Jake Morrison's head hurt like someone had hit him with a hammer. He opened his eyes slowly and saw white walls that seemed to glow with their own light. The air smelled wrong, like metal and chemicals mixed together. His mouth was dry and his throat burned when he tried to swallow. He was lying on something that felt like a bed, but it was too hard and cold. When he tried to sit up, pain shot through his whole body. Jake looked around the room and knew right away that he was not on his ship anymore. The walls were smooth and curved in ways that human builders never made. Strange symbols glowed on the surfaces, changing colors from blue to green to purple. Jake remembered being on the bridge of the Aurora with his crew. They were checking out a new star system near Vega when the space around them suddenly filled with massive ships. The ships were huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They came out of nowhere, appearing like ghosts in the darkness of space. His crew had tried to run, but the alien ships were too fast. Strange beams of light had grabbed the Aurora and pulled it toward the biggest ship. Jake remembered alarms going off, his crew shouting orders, and then everything went dark. Now he was here, wherever here was. The room had no windows, but Jake could feel that he was still in space. The slight vibration under his feet told him he was on a ship, probably a very big one. A door opened in the wall, though Jake had not seen any door there before. The opening was tall and narrow, made for someone much taller than a human. 3 figures walked through the doorway, and Jake's blood went cold when he saw them. The aliens were tall, maybe 8 feet high, with long, thin bodies that looked like they were made of pale gray rubber. Their arms and legs were too long, with joints that bent in the wrong places. But their faces were the worst part. They had large black eyes that took up most of their heads, eyes that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. They had no nose, just 2 small holes, and their mouths were thin lines that never seemed to move. The one in front wore clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal. It flowed over the alien's body like water, changing colors as it moved. The other 2 wore simple gray suits that covered them from neck to feet. Jake tried to stand up, but his legs would not work right. The aliens had done something to him, some kind of drug that made his body weak and slow. He managed to sit up on the edge of the bed thing, but that was all he could do. The alien in the metal clothes stepped forward. When it spoke, Jake heard the words inside his head instead of through his ears. The voice was cold and empty, like wind blowing through a graveyard. "I am Inquisitor Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien said without moving its mouth. "You are now a prisoner of the Empire. Your species has been marked for study and integration into our forces." Jake's throat was still sore, but he managed to speak. "What do you want with us? We never did anything to you." Veltar's black eyes seemed to focus on Jake's face. "What we want is not important. What matters is what you will give us. Your species is new to us, but all species are the same in the high. And you will tell us about your technology, your weaknesses, your fears. You will help us understand how to control your kind." "I won't tell you anything," Jake said, though his voice came out as a whisper. The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was cold and harsh. "You will tell us everything, not by choice, but because you will have no choice. We have ways of taking what we need from your mind." One of the other aliens stepped forward carrying a device that looked like a metal spider with too many legs. It moved and twitched in the alien's hands like it was alive. "This is a neural probe," Veltar explained. "It will enter your mind and take what information we require. We have used it on thousands of species across the galaxy. They all resist. At first, but in the end, they all break. Their minds are too simple, too weak to fight against our technology." Jake felt fear creeping up his spine, but he tried not to show it. "And if I refuse?" "There is no refusal. Veltar said. "The probe does not ask permission. It takes what it needs." The alien gestured to the other two, who moved toward Jake. He tried to fight them, but his body was still too weak from whatever they had done to him. They grabbed his arms and legs and carried him to another part of the room. There was a chair there, but it was not like any chair Jake had ever seen. It was made of the same white material as the walls, but it had metal wires and tubes growing out of it like roots. The aliens forced Jake into the chair, and immediately the wires began to move on their own, wrapping around his arms and legs and chest. Jake struggled, but the wires were stronger than steel. They held him tight against the chair, while more wires rose up from the back. These ones were thinner, with sharp points that gleamed in the strange light. "The neural probe will connect directly to your nervous system," Veltar explained as he watched Jake struggle. "It will read your thoughts, your memories, your emotions. Everything that makes you what you are will be open to us." The alien with the spider device came closer. Up close, Jake could see that it was not really a machine. It was alive, or at least partly alive. It had metal parts, but also things that looked like nerves and blood vessels. It moved and breathed like a small animal. "We have done this to beings from across the galaxy," Veltar continued. "Proud warrior races who thought they were unbreakable. Ancient civilizations with technology beyond your understanding. Peaceful species who tried to hide from us. In the end, they all gave us what we wanted." The spider thing was placed on a metal arm that extended from the chair. It moved closer to Jake's head, its metal legs reaching out toward his skull. "Your species is young and primitive," Veltar said. "You have barely learned to travel between stars. Your minds will be simple to read, easy to understand. We will know everything about humanity in a matter of hours." Jake looked into the alien's black eyes and saw nothing there. No mercy, no doubt, no emotion at all. These beings had done this countless times before, and they felt nothing about it. To them, he was just another primitive creature to be studied and catalogued. The spider thing touched his head, and Jake felt tiny needles sliding through his hair and into his skull. There was no pain, just a strange tingling sensation as the device connected to his brain. "Begin the probe," Veltar commanded. The world around Jake began to change. The white room started to fade, and he felt something cold and alien touching the edges of his mind. Veltar's consciousness was reaching into his thoughts, ready to take whatever it wanted. But as the alien's mind made contact with his own, Jake felt something that Veltar clearly did not expect. Instead of the simple, primitive thoughts the alien was looking for, Jake's mind was something else entirely. It was complex and deep and full of things that the Zephyrian had never encountered before. The probe was about to begin, and neither Jake nor Veltar knew what they were about to discover. Veltar's mind pushed into Jake's consciousness like a knife cutting through water. The Zephyrian expected to find the same simple patterns he had seen in thousands of other species. Most alien minds were easy to read, with thoughts that moved in straight lines from one idea to the next. Fear, hunger, the need to survive and reproduce. These were the basic drives that controlled most life forms in the galaxy. But Jake's mind was different. Very different. The first thing that confused Veltar was the sheer complexity of human thought. Instead of simple, straight lines, Jake's mind was like a vast web with millions of connections. Ideas linked to memories, which linked to emotions, which linked to dreams and hopes and fears, all tangled together in ways that made no sense. Veltar tried to follow one thought about Jake's ship, but it led to a memory of his father teaching him to fly when he was a child. That memory connected to the smell of his mother's cooking, which somehow linked to a song Jake had heard on the radio 20 years ago. The song reminded him of a girl he had loved in school, and that led to thoughts about art and poetry, and the meaning of life. The alien interrogator had never seen a mind that worked this way. How could these humans function with so much chaos in their heads? How could they make decisions when every thought led to 1,000 others? Veltar pushed deeper, looking for the simple survival instincts that drove all other species. But what he found made him pause in confusion. Jake's mind was full of ideas that had nothing to do with staying alive or having children. He thought about justice, about right and wrong, about beauty and truth and sacrifice. The alien had encountered species that had developed concepts of morality, but only as tools for group survival. They followed rules because it helped their tribe or their species live longer. But Jake's sense of right and wrong was different. He believed in helping others, even when it gave him no benefit. He would risk his life for strangers, fight for ideas he could not touch, and care about the future of people he would never meet. This made no sense to Veltar. Why would any creature waste energy on things that did not help it survive? Why would Jake care about abstract concepts like fairness or beauty when they serve no practical purpose? The alien pushed deeper into Jake's memories, looking for explanations. What he found was even more confusing. Jake's mind was full of stories, music, paintings, and poems that served no survival function at all. Humans created these things just because they were beautiful, just because they brought joy or wonder or sadness. Veltar saw Jake's memory of standing in front of a painting in a museum. The painting showed a field of flowers under a blue sky. It was not a map, not a tool, not information that could help Jake survive. It was just beautiful, and Jake had stood there for an hour looking at it, feeling emotions that the alien could not understand. The interrogator tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Perhaps these were mating displays, ways for humans to attract partners. But no, Jake created and enjoyed art even when no potential mates were around. He would read books alone in his room, listen to music when no one could hear him, and write poetry that no one else would ever see. Veltar's logical mind struggled to process this information. Art, music, stories, these things took time and energy to create. They used resources that could be spent on finding food, building shelter, or defending territory. Why would evolution create a species that wasted so much effort on useless activities? But as the alien dug deeper into Jake's mind, he began to see that these useless activities were connected to everything else. The music Jake loved affected how he felt about his friends. The stories he read shaped his ideas about right and wrong. The art he created helped him understand his own emotions and the emotions of others. Humans, Veltar realized, did not just survive. They tried to understand themselves and their place in the universe. They asked questions that had no answers, explored ideas that had no practical use, and created beauty for its own sake. The alien interrogator had studied thousands of species, but he had never encountered anything like this. Most creatures were focused on immediate needs: food, shelter, avoiding danger. Even the most advanced species Veltar had met were primarily concerned with gathering resources and expanding their territory. But humans were different. They thought about the past and worried about the future. They created stories about heroes and villains, about love and loss, about the meaning of existence. They built monuments not for defense or shelter, but to remember important events and honor the dead. Veltar found memories of Jake visiting graveyards where humans buried their dead. This was another puzzle. Most species simply discarded their dead or used them for food. But humans created elaborate rituals around death, built special places to remember those who had died, and told stories about their lives for generations. The alien saw Jake's memory of standing at his grandfather's grave, feeling sad even though the old man had been dead for years. Jake talked to the grave marker as if his grandfather could hear him, telling him about his life and asking for advice. This behavior served no survival purpose, but it clearly brought Jake comfort and helped him feel connected to his family's history. As Veltar explored more of Jake's mind, he encountered something that truly shocked him. Humans were aware of their own mortality in a way that went far beyond simple survival instinct. They knew they would die, but instead of living in constant fear, they used this knowledge to give meaning to their lives. Jake's mind was full of thoughts about legacy, about what he would leave behind, about how he would be remembered. He wanted to make a difference in the world, to help other people, to create something that would last after he was gone. This awareness of death had not paralyzed him with fear. Instead, it had motivated him to live with purpose. The alien interrogator had never encountered a species that dealt with mortality this way. Most creatures simply tried to avoid death for as long as possible. But humans seemed to accept that death was inevitable and used that acceptance to drive themselves to achieve great things. Veltar saw memories of humans who had sacrificed their lives for others, who had died fighting for causes they believed in, who had chosen death rather than betray their principles. These were not acts of survival instinct. They were acts of conscious choice, based on values that were more important to these humans than their own lives. The alien's mind reeled as he tried to process this information. How could any species evolve values that were more important than survival? How could they choose principles over life itself? But as Veltar continued to probe Jake's mind, he began to see that this was exactly what made humans so dangerous. They did not just fight for territory or resources. They fought for ideas, for freedom, for the right to think and create and love as they chose. The interrogator saw Jake's memories of human history, of wars fought not just for land or wealth, but for concepts like democracy and equality. He saw humans who had endured torture and death rather than give up their beliefs, who had stood up to overwhelming odds because they believed they were right. And slowly, terrifyingly, Veltar began to understand what his people had done. They had not captured just another primitive species. They had awakened something that could not be controlled through simple force or fear. The neural probe continued its work, but now it was the alien who was beginning to feel afraid. Jake's mind was not simple or primitive. It was vast and complex and full of things that Veltar had never imagined could exist. The interrogator tried to withdraw from Jake's consciousness, but found that he could not. The human's mind was too complex, too alien, too different from anything he had encountered before. And worse, Jake's thoughts were starting to affect his own mind in ways that Veltar did not understand. For the first time in his life, the alien interrogator was learning what it meant to be afraid. Veltar's confidence began to crack as he went deeper into Jake's memories. The alien had expected to find simple thoughts about survival and reproduction, but instead, he was discovering something that made his cold blood run even colder. Jake's mind was filled with memories of human history, and that history was unlike anything Veltar had ever seen. The interrogator watched through Jake's memories as humans fought wars that lasted for years, sometimes decades. But these were not simple battles for territory or resources. Humans fought for ideas that they could not even touch. They died for concepts like freedom, justice, and equality. They sacrificed everything for beliefs that existed only in their minds. Veltar saw the memory of Jake reading about a human war where millions of people died fighting against an evil government. The humans could have surrendered and lived as slaves, but they chose to fight and die instead. They believed that some things were more important than staying alive, and they were willing to prove it with their blood. The alien interrogator had conquered dozens of species, but he had never seen anything like this. Most creatures would submit when faced with overwhelming force. They would accept slavery rather than death. But humans were different. They would rather die free than live as prisoners. But what really disturbed Veltar was discovering that humans were capable of both incredible cruelty and amazing kindness, sometimes at the same time. He saw Jake's memories of human conflicts where soldiers would fight brutally during the day, then risk their lives to save enemy wounded at night. They could hate their enemies and still treat them with compassion. The alien saw memories of humans who had committed terrible acts of violence, but who also showed love and tenderness to their families. He saw leaders who ordered the deaths of thousands, but who also created hospitals and schools and libraries. Humans contained contradictions that should have destroyed them, but somehow made them stronger. Veltar encountered something in Jake's mind that had no word in the Zephyrian language. Jake called it hope. Even when everything seemed lost, when defeat appeared certain, humans maintained a belief that things could get better. This hope was not based on logic or evidence. It was simply a refusal to accept that failure was final. Aliens saw Jake's memory of reading about a human city that had been under attack for almost 3 years. The people were starving, their buildings were destroyed, and they had no chance of winning. But they continued to fight, continued to resist, because they hoped that somehow, some way, they would find a way to survive. And they did survive. Against all odds, against all logic, they found a way to win. Not through superior weapons or greater numbers, but through sheer determination and the refusal to give up. This hope, Veltar realized, was what made humans truly dangerous. Other species would calculate their chances and surrender when defeat was certain. But humans would fight impossible battles and somehow find ways to win them. The Interrogator saw memory after memory of humans achieving things that should have been impossible. They climbed mountains that could not be climbed, survived in places where life could not exist, and solved problems that had no solutions. They did these things not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. Veltar's mind was struggling to process what he was learning. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the assumption that all species were fundamentally the same. They had simple needs and simple fears, and they could be controlled through force and intimidation. But humans were proving that assumption wrong. As the alien probed deeper into Jake's mind, he began to experience human emotions directly. The neural connection was working both ways, and Jake's feelings were flowing into Veltar's consciousness. Like a flood. For the first time in his life, the alien felt warmth, compassion, and love. Veltar experienced Jake's memory of holding his newborn daughter, feeling a love so strong it was almost painful. The alien had never felt anything like this. Zephyrians reproduced by laying eggs in communal pools, and they felt no attachment to their offspring. But Jake's love for his child was so intense that it made Veltar's entire body tremble. The Interrogator felt Jake's grief when his father died, a sadness so deep it seemed to have no bottom. But mixed with the grief was gratitude for the years they had shared, and a determination to honor his father's memory by living a good life. Veltar had never experienced loss this way. When Zephyrians died, they were simply gone, forgotten, replaced by new individuals who served the same function. But humans remembered their dead, celebrated their lives, and carried their teachings forward to the next generation. Death was not an ending, but a transformation, a passing of wisdom and love from one generation to the next. Veltar felt Jake's anger at injustice, his joy at seeing beauty, his satisfaction at solving difficult problems. These emotions were not just reactions to external events. They were part of who Jake was, part of what made him human. They drove him to make choices that no purely logical being would make. The alien Interrogator saw Jake's memory of risking his life to save a stranger's child from a burning building. There was no logical reason to do this. The child was not related to Jake, and saving her gave him no advantage. But Jake had run into the flames anyway, because he could not bear the thought of letting an innocent person die when he could help. This was when Veltar began to understand the true horror of what his people had done. Humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something unique in the galaxy, a form of life that had developed capabilities that the Zephyrians had never even imagined. The Interrogator realized that humans did not just fight as individuals. When they were threatened, they became something more than the sum of their parts. They worked together with a unity that transcended their individual selves. They shared information, resources, and support in ways that made them incredibly resilient. Veltar saw Jake's memories of human communities coming together during disasters. When earthquakes destroyed cities, humans from around the world sent help. When diseases threatened populations, human scientists worked together to find cures. When wars broke out, humans organized to protect the innocent and provide aid to the suffering. The alien had never seen cooperation like this. Zephyrians worked together only when ordered to do so by their superiors. But humans chose to help each other, even when it cost them time, money, or safety. They did it because they believed that all humans deserved compassion and support. This realization filled Veltar with a fear unlike anything he had ever experienced. His people had attacked humanity, thinking they were just another primitive species. But humans had something that made them far more dangerous than superior technology or greater numbers. They had the ability to unite, to work together, to become stronger when they were threatened. The Interrogator saw flashes of what humans could accomplish when they truly worked together. They had built cities that reached into the sky, sent ships to other worlds, and created art and literature that captured the beauty and complexity of existence. They had done all of this while fighting wars, surviving disasters, and overcoming countless obstacles. But what terrified Veltar most was realizing that humans were still young as a species. They had achieved all of these things in just a few 1,000 years of civilization. What would they be capable of in another 1,000 years? Another 10,000? The alien tried to pull his consciousness back from Jake's mind, but found that he could not. The human's thoughts were too complex, too interconnected, too alien for the Zephyrian technology to handle. The neural probe was overloading, and Veltar's own mind was being affected by the connection. For the first time in his existence, the alien Interrogator was experiencing doubt about his people's methods. He was beginning to question whether the Zephyrian way of life was truly superior to what he was seeing in Jake's mind. And that questioning was about to lead him to discoveries that would change everything he thought he knew about himself and his people. The neural connection between Veltar and Jake was no longer working the way it was supposed to. The alien had designed the probe to be a one-way flow of information, with him taking what he wanted from Jake's mind while keeping his own thoughts protected. But something had gone wrong. Jake's consciousness was flowing back through the connection, and Veltar was experiencing things that no Zephyrian was meant to feel. The Interrogator felt Jake's memories of friendship, of sitting around a fire with his crew members and sharing stories. They laughed together, supported each other through difficult times, and risked their lives for one another without being ordered to do so. Veltar had never experienced bonds like these. Zephyrians worked together efficiently, but they felt no emotional connection to their colleagues. But Jake's friendships were different. They were based on choice, not duty. His crew members cared about him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They would die for him, and he would die for them, not out of obedience, but out of love. Veltar experienced Jake's memory of losing a crew member named Danny in a mining accident. The alien felt Jake's grief, his guilt at surviving when his friend had died, and his determination to honor Danny's memory by taking care of his family. These emotions were so intense that Veltar's body began to shake. He had never felt anything like this raw, overwhelming sadness mixed with love and loyalty. The Interrogator realized that humans did not just form temporary alliances for survival. They created lasting bonds that went beyond any practical purpose. They loved each other, mourned for each other, and carried each other's memories long after death. This emotional connection gave them a strength that no amount of advanced technology could match. As the connection deepened, Veltar began to see through Jake's eyes what the Zephyrian Empire truly was. Through human perspective, his people were not the noble conquerors he had been taught to believe they were. They were destroyers, killers who eliminated everything beautiful and unique about the species they conquered. The alien saw Jake's memory of learning about the Zephyrian attacks on human colonies. Entire cities had been destroyed, millions of people killed, and the survivors forced into slavery. But what horrified Jake was not just the death and destruction. It was the waste, the senseless elimination of art, music, literature, and culture that could never be replaced. Veltar felt Jake's rage at this loss, but it was not the simple anger of a warrior whose people had been attacked. It was the grief of someone who understood that something irreplaceable had been destroyed forever. The humans who had died were not just numbers in a casualty report. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, talents, and stories that would never be told. The Interrogator experienced Jake's memory of visiting a human museum that had been damaged in a Zephyrian attack. Paintings that had taken years to create were destroyed in minutes. Books that contained the wisdom of generations were burned. Musical instruments that had brought joy to countless people were smashed beyond repair. Through Jake's eyes, Veltar saw that his people were not bringing order to the galaxy. They were destroying the very things that made life worth living. They were eliminating diversity, creativity, and beauty in favor of cold efficiency and uniformity. The alien felt Jake's determination to stop the Zephyrian Empire, not just to save human lives, but to preserve the right of all species to exist as they chose. Jake was not fighting for conquest or dominance. He was fighting for the freedom of all beings to create, to love, to hope, and to be different. This realization struck Veltar like a physical blow. He had spent his entire life believing that his people were superior, that they had the right to rule other species because they were more advanced. But now he was seeing that advancement meant nothing without compassion, that technology was worthless without wisdom, and that power was meaningless without love. The Interrogator felt Jake's memories of human children learning to read, to paint, to play music. These children were not being trained to be efficient workers or soldiers. They were being taught to think, to create, to question, and to dream. They were being prepared not just to survive, but to live fully and to contribute something beautiful to the world. Veltar compared this to his own childhood, where young Zephyrians were taught only to obey orders and fulfill their assigned functions. They were not encouraged to think for themselves or to create anything new. They were made into perfect tools for the Empire, but they were not allowed to be individuals. The alien realized that his people had sacrificed everything that made life meaningful in pursuit of power and control. They had become efficient, but they had also become empty. They could conquer worlds, but they could not create beauty. They could build vast fleets, but they could not write a single poem or compose a single song. Through Jake's memories, Veltar experienced what it meant to be truly alive. He felt the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of creation, the warmth of love, and the pain of loss. These emotions were messy and complicated, and sometimes painful, but they were what made existence worthwhile. The Interrogator began to understand that humans were not primitive because they felt emotions. They were advanced because they had learned to use their emotions to create something greater than themselves. Their art, their music, their literature, their capacity for love and sacrifice. These were not weaknesses to be eliminated. They were strengths that made humans capable of incredible achievements. Veltar felt Jake's memory of the first time he saw Earth from space. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and white clouds and green continents. But what moved Jake was not just the physical beauty of his world. It was the knowledge that this small planet was home to billions of unique individuals, each with their own story, their own dreams, their own contribution to make to the great human story. The alien had never felt anything like this connection to a place or a people. Zephyrians were born to serve the Empire, not to love their home world. But Jake's love for Earth and humanity was so strong that it made Veltar weep for reasons he did not understand. The Interrogator realized that humans did not just fight for survival. They fought for the right to exist as themselves, to preserve their culture and their way of life, to pass on their values and their dreams to future generations. They were not just defending territory or resources. They were defending the right to be human. As this understanding washed over him, Veltar began to feel something he had never experienced before. It was guilt, remorse for the countless lives his people had destroyed, for the civilizations they had eliminated, for the beauty they had crushed in their pursuit of power. The aliens saw that every species the Zephyrians had conquered had been unique, with their own culture, their own art, their own way of understanding the universe. And his people had destroyed all of it, reducing vibrant civilizations to uniform slavery. Veltar's mind began to fracture under the weight of this realization. He had spent his entire life believing that he was serving a noble cause, that he was bringing order to chaos. But now he saw that he had been part of something monstrous, something that destroyed everything beautiful and meaningful in the galaxy. The Interrogator tried desperately to pull his consciousness back from Jake's mind, but it was too late. The human's thoughts and emotions had become intertwined with his own, and Veltar was no longer sure where Jake's mind ended and his own began. For the first time in his existence, the alien Interrogator was experiencing what it meant to have a conscience, to feel responsible for the suffering he had caused. And that knowledge was about to destroy everything he thought he knew about himself and his people. The neural probe was failing. Veltar could feel the machine overheating as it tried to process the complexity of Jake's mind. The alien technology had been designed to handle simple thoughts and basic emotions, but human consciousness was too vast, too complicated, too different from anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Sparks flew from the probe's metal legs as it struggled to maintain the connection. The machine made grinding noises that filled the white room with harsh sounds, but Veltar could not shut it down. He was trapped in Jake's mind, experiencing thoughts and feelings that were tearing apart his understanding of reality. The Interrogator felt Jake's consciousness flowing through his own mind like a river of light. The human was not attacking him or trying to hurt him. Instead, Jake was simply sharing his experiences, his memories, his humanity. And that sharing was more devastating than any weapon. Veltar experienced Jake's memory of his wedding day, feeling the joy and love and hope that had filled that moment. The alien had never felt anything like this pure happiness, this sense of connection to another being. Zephyrians did not marry for love. They were assigned breeding partners by the Empire, and they performed their reproductive duties without emotion. But Jake's marriage was different. It was based on choice, on mutual respect and affection, on the desire to share a life together. Veltar felt Jake's love for his wife, a love so strong and deep that it made the alien's entire body tremble. This was not just physical attraction or biological need. It was a connection of souls, a bond that transcended the physical world. Interrogator experienced Jake's memory of holding his newborn daughter for the first time. A tiny human was helpless, unable to defend herself or contribute anything to society. By Zephyrian logic, she was worthless. But Jake's love for his child was overwhelming, a protective instinct so strong that he would gladly die to keep her safe. Veltar felt Jake's determination to build a better world for his daughter, to fight against injustice and cruelty, so that she could grow up in a universe where love was stronger than hate. The alien had never felt this kind of selfless devotion, this willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else's future. As the connection deepened, Veltar began to understand the true magnitude of what his people had done. They had not just conquered planets and enslaved populations. They had destroyed families, separated parents from children, ended love stories that had taken years to develop. They had crushed dreams and eliminated hope from millions of lives. The alien felt Jake's rage at the Zephyrian attacks, but it was not the simple anger of a warrior. It was the righteous fury of someone who had seen innocence destroyed, of a father who knew that his own daughter might suffer the same fate that had befallen countless other children across the galaxy. But mixed with Jake's anger was something that shocked Veltar even more. There was sadness for the Zephyrians themselves, pity for a species that had become so cold and empty that they could no longer feel love or create beauty. Jake did not just hate his enemies. He mourned for what they had lost, for what they could have been if they had chosen a different path. This compassion was unlike anything Veltar had ever encountered. Even while Jake was being tortured by the neural probe, even while his people were being killed and enslaved, he still felt sorry for his captors. He understood that the Zephyrians were victims too, prisoners of their own system, trapped in a way of life that had stripped them of everything that made existence meaningful. The Interrogator experienced Jake's memory of reading about ancient Zephyrian history before the Empire had become what it was now. Once, long ago, his people had been different. They had created art, felt emotions, and lived as individuals rather than as tools of the state. But somewhere in their past, they had chosen power over love, efficiency over creativity, conquest over cooperation. Veltar saw through Jake's eyes what his people could become again if they chose to change. They could learn to feel, to create, to love. They could become part of the great community of species in the galaxy instead of its destroyers. But first, they would have to admit that they had been wrong, that their way of life was not superior but empty. The alien felt Jake's hope that this could happen, that even the Zephyrian Empire could be redeemed. This hope was not based on logic or evidence. The Empire had shown no sign of change for thousands of years. But Jake believed that any species capable of consciousness was also capable of growth, of learning, of becoming something better than what they were got, as Veltar's mind was flooded with human thoughts and emotions. He began to experience something that no Zephyrian was supposed to feel. He began to doubt everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about his people and their mission. The Interrogator realized that the Zephyrian Empire was not bringing order to the galaxy. It was spreading death and emptiness, eliminating diversity and beauty in favor of cold uniformity. His people were not superior beings destined to rule. They were broken creatures who had forgotten how to live. This realization was like a physical blow that sent Veltar staggering backward from the probe. He tried to break the connection, but Jake's consciousness had become intertwined with his own. The human's thoughts and feelings were now part of him, and he could not escape them. The alien looked at Jake, still strapped to the interrogation chair, and for the first time saw him not as a primitive creature to be studied, but as a person. A father who loved his daughter, a husband who missed his wife, a captain who cared about his crew, a human being who was fighting to protect everything he held dear. Veltar's legs gave out, and he fell to his knees on the white floor. The other Zephyrians in the room moved toward him, but he waved them away. He could not let them see what was happening to him, could not let them know that the interrogation had gone wrong in ways they could never understand. The alien interrogator looked up at Jake and saw something in the human's eyes that completed his transformation. There was no hatred there, no desire for revenge. There was only sadness, understanding, and something that Veltar now recognized as compassion. Jake was not just another prisoner to be broken and discarded. He was a teacher, showing Veltar and his people what they had lost, what they could become if they chose to change. The human was offering them something that the Zephyrians had forgotten existed, the chance for redemption. "Please," Veltar whispered, his voice breaking with emotions he had never felt before. "Please forgive us. We did not know what we were destroying. We thought we were bringing order, but we were only spreading emptiness. We thought we were superior, but we were only broken." Jake looked down at the alien kneeling before him and felt his own heart breaking. He saw in Veltar's black eyes the same capacity for growth and change that existed in every conscious being. The Zephyrian was not evil, just lost, trapped in a system that had taught him to fear everything that made life beautiful. "You can change," Jake said softly. "Your people can learn to feel again, to create again, to love again. But first, you have to stop the killing. You have to end the empire and let the enslaved species go free." Veltar nodded, tears streaming down his pale face. He understood now what Jake was offering. Not just forgiveness, but the chance to become something more than conquerors and destroyers. The chance to join the community of conscious beings instead of standing apart from it. "We will try," the alien whispered. "I will convince my people, make them understand what I have learned. We will stop the killing, free the slaves, try to repair the damage we have done." Jake smiled, and Veltar felt that smile like warmth spreading through his cold body. "That's all anyone can do," the human said. "Try to be better tomorrow than you were today." The interrogation chamber fell silent, except for the dying sounds of the overloaded neural probe. Two beings from different worlds, different species, different ways of life, looked at each other with understanding and hope. Veltar had come to break Jake's mind and steal his secrets. Instead, Jake had shown him what it meant to be truly alive. The alien interrogator had learned the most important lesson in the universe, that consciousness without compassion was not evolution but death, and that the greatest strength any species could possess was the capacity to love. Outside the chamber, the Zephyrian Empire continued its march across the galaxy. But inside that white room, something had changed forever. One alien had learned to feel, and through him, an entire species might learn to live again. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in thousands of years, it was also full of hope.